At first, the crash was a blur in my mind. A hazy, fractured memory missing all the key details. When I tried to pull those missing pieces together, I could only see a muddled series of images, like flipping through a stack of blurry, out-of-focus Polaroid photos that had been mixed up in no particular order. But as time passed, those memories became sharper. In the beginning, though, everything felt like a whirlwind of motion and sound. This is what I could recall at first. I was sitting next to Emma. The two seats across the aisle were empty. The pilot briefly turned around to look at us, and for a moment, I could see him clearly. There was something about him that stuck with me, not the fear on his face, or the loud instructions he yelled to us, but something else. Something important. My sister's face was lit up with her usual radiant smile, her big brown eyes wide with excitement. She was trying to say something to me, but the roar of the engine made it hard to hear. I looked out the window and watched the Alps stretch out below us. The green valleys, the scattered pine trees creating odd, almost cryptic shapes on the land. Not birthmarks, I thought to myself. More like scars. It seemed like an important distinction, but I couldn't figure out why. Then, suddenly, there was a deafening noise, a massive, sudden sound like an explosion, but there was no fire at first. Just the horrible grinding of metal, followed by screams. Screams from me, from Emma, from the pilot, and from someone else. Maybe there was another person on the plane. The plane tilted sharply forward. We were spiraling toward the ground. The force threw the pilot from his seat, and I never saw him again. Something about him stuck in my mind, too. It wasn't just the fear on his face, it was something else. Before I could figure out what that was, we were seconds from the ground. The rush of air was deafening. Panic rose in my chest. I wanted to turn and look at my sister, but I knew there wasn't time. Everything went black. A deep, silent shadow swallowed me up. It wasn't death, but it felt close. Then, just as quickly, I came back. My mind surfaced from that shadow, and I opened my eyes. It was quiet now, no screams, no grinding metal, just the steady hum of cicadas filling the air. It was early when the crash happened, but now it was twilight. The air tasted faintly of smoke and iron as I took a breath. I turned my head, and I saw Emma. She was close, but too far. Her broken body was caught in a tree, hanging there like a grim reminder. Dark red blood smeared the bark around her, and when I reached out, the warmth of it clung to my fingers. I leaned against the tree and stretched my arms up, desperate to pull her down. But she was too high. I kept reaching, over and over, pleading for some miracle, as though I could save her by just holding on tight enough. I blinked, and the next thing I knew, I was in a hospital room, lying in bed. Now, everything was silent. The kind of still silence that stretched on for hours as I drifted in and out of awareness. Then, a voice shattered the quiet. "What do you remember about what happened to you, son?" A tall, grizzled man in a worn white lab coat stood at the foot of my bed, his gray-blue eyes fixed on mine. That first week in the hospital flew by. Dr. Walker and Nurse Rachel were incredibly attentive, always close by when I needed them. I didn't have many suspicions or questions at the time, so I was able to rest. When I finally felt clear enough to talk, I told Dr. Walker what I remembered about the crash. He sat beside my bed in a wooden chair, listening carefully. Emma and I had been on vacation, visiting the European countryside. We were flying over the Eastern Alps when something went terribly wrong with the plane. I couldn't remember if it was a mechanical failure or if the pilot had collided with something. Either way, we were falling like a stone. The thought of Emma hung over me like a weight. There was a question I had been fighting to ask, something stuck in my throat like a thorn, refusing to come loose. Eventually, I found the courage, and the words slipped out. Is my sister alive?" Dr. Walker paused, his expression softening as he asked, brown hair, a mole on her cheek. I nodded, bracing myself. "Yes, she's here. She's in critical condition, but we're doing everything we can for her. We believe she'll make it, but she hasn't woken up yet." A wave of relief swept over me, and I sank back into the pillow, tears stinging my eyes. As I cried quietly, Dr. Walker filled in the blanks, explaining where I was, how I got there, and what would happen next. The crash had happened outside of Bavaria, in southern Germany. A farmer had seen the plane coming down and called for help right away. Emma and I had been brought to a small hospital about 10 minutes away from the crash site. Both my legs were broken, and I had lost a lot of blood, but other than that, I was mostly okay. Emma had more severe injuries, though, and was in intensive care. Dr. Walker was confident she would recover. There had been no other survivors. He patted me on the shoulder and told me to rest, adding that Nurse Rachel would be in soon to check on my vitals. "When can I see her? When can I see Emma?" Dr. Walker's steps slowed as he reached the door, and for a long moment, he didn't move. He stood there with his hand on the door handle, his back to me. After a long silence, he finally turned, opened the door, and left. That was when I realized something wasn't right. Something about the situation felt off, but I couldn't quite put my finger on it. It felt as though the casts weren't meant to heal me but to restrain me, chaining me to the bed, preventing any chance of escape. Are my legs even really broken? Panic flared in my chest, spreading through me like wildfire. "I want to see my sister," I demanded, my voice trembling but resolute. The nurse, a small man with a thick, brown-red beard, dropped the clipboard he had been scribbling on in response to my defiance. It hit the floor with a sharp clatter. Without saying a word, he walked over to the door, opened it, and left. As the door creaked shut, revealing a sliver of the waiting darkness outside, I grimaced. That blackness, creeping into the room, had started to press on my chest, squeezing tighter with every passing moment. I had to know what was out there, but part of me desperately didn't want to find out. It felt like a representation of everything wrong with my situation, this hospital, this room, the so-called safety. All of it was a farce, an illusion to cover up something darker, something that lurked just out of sight. The shadows slipping through the cracks in the facade were more than a metaphor. They were a warning. A few minutes later, Dr. Osler walked into my room, the door swaying closed behind him. "Dr. Osler," I said, my voice barely controlled. "You've told me Divya is alive. You've assured me over and over that she's recovering here, but I haven't seen her once. Bring her to me. If she's too weak to come here, then bring me to her." His gray-blue eyes locked onto mine, drilling into me with fury. He was enraged, his face twisted in a way that made my blood run cold. "She's not done yet," he muttered through gritted teeth. I stared at him, the words not making any sense. "What the hell does that mean?" His gaze shifted, a flicker of something behind his eyes that I couldn't place. As he looked away, I noticed a familiar line on his face, a subtle scar tracing the curve of his nose. It was the same one I'd seen on the pilot, and as it clicked into place, a chill ran down my spine. Before the horror of that thought could fully materialize, Dr. Osler spoke again. "Divya's not ready for visitors. He clarified." "All right, well, what's the holdup?" "Tell me why she's not ready," I pressed, trying to keep the tremor from my voice. His eyes met mine once more, grim and unyielding. "Soon." That word, the way it slipped from his lips, didn't sound like a promise. It was more of a dismissal. As if I wasn't supposed to ask anymore. And then, without another word, he turned and walked back into the shadows. I said nothing. No protests, no accusations. Instead, my mind raced, the static of panic filling every corner of my brain. Everything I'd heard in the past hour, everything I'd seen, began to align in a terrifying way. The pilot had a scar just like that. I could picture it clearly, the memory flooding back in waves. I could even hear his voice, shaking with fear as he turned to us in the cockpit. Something's landed on the wing. And then, moments later, he was gone, ripped away by whatever had landed. The sheer impossibility of that memory weighed me down like a concussion. My thoughts swirled in confusion until sleep pulled me under, the mental exhaustion taking over. I awoke hours later, the clock reading midnight. I'd slept for just over 6 hours, though I would have kept going had it not been for a sharp pain in my lower back. It was a strange blessing disguised as agony. I twisted my body, my hand fumbling behind me, trying to find the source of the pain. When I finally touched something hard and metallic, my heart skipped. The shape was unmistakable, a tempered steel spring, worn and sharp at the tip. It wasn't a weapon, but it could do some damage, and more importantly, it might be the key to freeing me from these oppressive casts. Before I could focus on the spring, something else changed in the room. For the first time in a month, my hospital room was completely dark. My breath caught in my throat, panic blooming. I scanned the room, trying to adjust to the darkened surroundings. And then, in the corner of my vision, I saw it, something in the shadows, a form too still, too unmoving. Someone was in the room with me. Who's there? I whispered, the words barely leaving my mouth. The figure stirred, stepping closer until it loomed over the end of my bed. When it grinned, my heart raced, skipping from relief to terror, unable to settle on any one emotion. Divya, I gasped. At first, she nodded slowly, almost cautiously. But then her nodding grew faster, more frantic, jerking up and down with such force that I thought her neck might snap. A wave of paralyzing dread froze me in place. I couldn't move, couldn't speak. All I could do was watch as my sister shuffled closer, shaking her head violently, still nodding. When she finally stopped in front of me, her face was nearly pressed against mine. And then she spoke, her voice too soft, too familiar. Yes, it's me. Don't worry, okay? Don't ask about me. I'm fine. They're taking such good care of us here. Her eyes weren't brown anymore. They were gray-blue, just like Dr. Osler's. Just like Nurse Rachel's. Just like every nurse I'd seen. And with that, she stood up, turned, and walked out the door. From that moment on, I accepted that my sister was dead. My focus sharpened entirely on escape. Grief could come later, after I was away from whatever thing had taken her, whatever monster had stolen her body. The process of disassembling the casts with the sharpened steel spring was slow, tedious work. Every minute the creature wasn't in the room, I chipped away at the plaster, making sure to focus on the underside of the mold instead of the outer surface. That way, if it ever checked the cast, it wouldn't be as obvious that I'd been weakening it, piece by piece. When it was in the room, wearing the disguise of a human, I smiled. I engaged in polite conversation, showered it with gratitude, thanked it for every little thing. That's what it wanted, I realized. It needed to be appreciated, to be praised. As long as I kept it content, it stayed docile, compliant. Gradually, I could tell the casts were growing weaker, the plaster thinning to the point where a few good hits would shatter them. But once I did that, there'd be no turning back. My escape would be obvious, my legs freed from the restraints, an unmistakable sign of rebellion. I couldn't predict what it would appear next. There was no pattern to its visits, no way to know when I'd have the best chance to slip away. But luck was on my side that day. It was nearby, but distracted. I hadn't eaten much in weeks, barely surviving on the occasional spoonful of brackish meat soup the creature brought me. My body had withered away, and my legs had atrophied to the point where they could no longer support me. My muscles were gone, replaced by fragile bones, brittle tendons. But my arms still had enough strength to drag my weak body across the floor. I positioned myself by the door, my back propped up against the wall. I stopped for a moment, holding my breath, listening. No footsteps in the hallway. No whispers of "Are we taking good care of you?" coming from outside. All I could hear was the pounding of my heart, slamming against my ribs like a prisoner desperate to break free. I took a deep breath and reached for the doorknob. Slowly, I slid it open. On the other side wasn't the hell I had imagined. Not exactly, anyway. The hospital was still standing, but it was abandoned. Or had been for some time. A crumpled German newspaper I found, dated September 1969, confirmed that. The hallways of the medical ward were dim, lit only by the weak light filtering through broken windows. Thick dust, shattered glass, and skittering insects cluttered the floor. I crawled past overturned crash carts and scattered transport beds, feeling like a soldier navigating the trenches of some forgotten battlefield. At the far end of the hall, a beam of bright white light poured through a doorway, illuminating a patch of weeds that had grown wild outside. It was my escape. But the closer I got, the stronger the stench became. A sickening, unbearable mix of rotting fish, bleach, and tanning leather. The thing wasn't gone. It was still here, somewhere. When the smell grew nearly unbearable, I knew I had reached the source, the place where it called home. I didn't see everything as I crawled by, but enough of it was exposed. The door had been torn from its hinges, and a massive hole in the ceiling cast a spotlight onto what lay beneath. I saw enough to understand, or at least to glimpse the horror of what had been happening. The room, the stench, came from the chamber where the thing kept its costumes. It had impersonated everyone I'd encountered in the hospital: Dr. Osler, Nurse Annalise, all the other nurses, and most recently, Divya. All of them had been nothing more than roles in the creature's grotesque play. Around me, hundreds of eyeless bodies dangled from wooden poles like twisted scarecrows. Their arms stretched outwards, held in place by crude horizontal beams tied across their backs. Thick, pulsating gray-blue cords suspended them in the air at various heights. Despite the overwhelming stench, most of the bodies seemed to be in decent condition, with only minimal signs of decay. They hung there, lifeless, glistening with some kind of varnish, swaying gently in the breeze that filtered through the massive hole above. It was a gallery of horrors, a collection of broken, empty husks, the thing's trophies, its camouflage, its mask. Then, I saw it. A mass, gray-blue and contorted, barely resembling a human. It was cradling Annalise's eyeless, limp body in its grotesque arms, at the center of the room. Thousands of fly wings protruded from its flesh, some tiny, others grotesquely magnified. The largest wings I could see were the size of a mailbox, twitching and jerking constantly, blurring the creature's frame in a whirlwind of movement. It seemed motionless, yet the wings never stopped, constantly shifting in chaotic agitation. It had its back turned to me, unaware of my presence. My stomach churned in horror as I watched it raise one of its malformed hands, holding something small and wooden. Every few seconds, it brought the object down, caressing Annalise's scalp with worn bristles. It was brushing her hair. Then, it spoke, and the terror that surged through my veins was paralyzing. My body shook uncontrollably, like a wing caught in a violent gust of wind. The voice was a cacophony, a choir of separate voices, 20 or 30 of them, all speaking in unison, men, women, children, all cooing together. "Are we taking such good care of you? Are we taking such good care of you?" I couldn't hold back the panic. Just as a scream began to rise in my throat, I was saved by the distant sound of helicopter blades. The creature stopped. Its head tilted toward the noise, and with terrifying speed, it shot into the air, its legs and body lifted by the convulsing wings of flies, flying through the hole in the ceiling. And then, I was alone. The room was filled with the sound of wind and the crackling hum of distant helicopters. The dead bodies of hundreds of people, hanging lifelessly in the breeze, watched me, eyeless, silent witnesses to my breakdown. Their stolen forms swayed with the wind, like puppets abandoned by their strings. I couldn't see Divya's body. Perhaps that was a blessing. It took me nearly a day of crawling through the abandoned hospital and the surrounding wilderness before I found another living soul. A man, out hunting, and his dog. They took me to a real hospital, where I spent the next 6 months recovering. I told the police about the crash, the abandoned hospital, the creature, and the grotesque collection of bodies. They listened, but they didn't dismiss me. Yet, it was clear they weren't going to investigate. They knew about the thing, and they weren't going to get involved. Maybe it was safer that way. That was 10 years ago. Since then, I've rebuilt my life. It hasn't been easy, but I've done it. Got married, had a few kids. I buried Divya, symbolically, at least, in a vacant grave, marking her tombstone with the date of the crash. I hope that's when she died, but I can't be sure. I try not to dwell on that. The hardest part has been learning to trust people again. Especially when I'm alone with someone. It feels dangerous. Checking their color has become a habit, but sometimes, it's not enough. What if it's that thing in disguise, looking to drag me back to that hellhole? You might wonder why I'm telling you all of this after so many years. Well, it's because of something that happened this afternoon. My wife came home early from work. She's been acting strange, sitting on the couch, staring at nothing, listening but not saying a word. Her eyes have always been dark blue. But today, they look different. I'm locked in our bedroom now. I can hear her downstairs, whispering something. I can't make out the words. Once I post this, I'll open the door and find out. And I hope to God I'm wrong. We're going to take such good care of you.